Chapter 1: The Breakdown. Joe grips the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the empty road stretching out before him. It's a quiet stretch of highway, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. He's on his way to fix an internet outage at a corporate office in the next town over, a high-stakes call for a major client. He's been through these emergencies 100 times, but something feels different today. As Joe drives, he finds himself lost in thought. He's been an IT technician for what feels like forever, but lately, the idea of troubleshooting networks for the rest of his life has been weighing on him. There's a nagging voice in the back of his mind telling him it's time for a change, though he hasn't figured out what that means yet. Suddenly, his car jerks and sputters, and within moments, the engine dies completely. Cursing under his breath, Joe manages to coast to the shoulder, coming to a stop just before a faded welcome sign marking the entrance to a small town. He tries the ignition a few more times, but it's clear the car's not going to cooperate. Taking a deep breath, Joe steps out and surveys the landscape. The only sign of life is a mechanic's shop a little ways down the road. With no other choice, Joe locks up and makes his way toward the shop. Inside, a grizzled mechanic greets him with a nod, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. Joe explains his situation, watching as the mechanic's face remains expressionless. The man takes a quick look under the hood, then straightens up with a grim look. "Gonna need a part I don't have on hand," the mechanic says. "Could be a day or two." Joe sighs, feeling the weight of the delay settle on his shoulders. He's supposed to be in the next town, fixing an internet crisis, not stuck in some out-of-the-way place with no clear timeline. He thanks the mechanic and pulls out his phone, checking for accommodations. He's annoyed to find there's only one option, a small inn just down the street. He makes his way there, hoping this will be a quick pit stop. After checking into the inn, Joe decides to explore the town. He strolls down Main Street, taking in the odd mix of mom-and-pop shops, an old-fashioned general store, and a cafe with a handful of patrons sipping coffee on a weathered patio. The whole place has an eerie quietness to it, like everyone's holding their breath. He steps into the cafe, and the barista, a young woman with a friendly smile, strikes up a conversation. She asks where he's from, what he's doing in town, her questions a little too pointed. Joe feels a prickle of unease, but he chalks it up to small-town curiosity. He makes small talk, careful not to reveal too much, and then heads back outside. As he walks back to the mechanic to check on his car, Joe can't shake the feeling that this town is more than it appears. The friendly smiles seem a little too practiced, the small-town charm a little too forced. He finds the shop closed for the evening, with a hastily scrawled note on the door promising an update tomorrow. With nothing else to do, Joe returns to his room at the inn. He tosses his bag on the bed, sinking into the old, creaky mattress with a sigh. He tells himself it's just a delay, just a minor inconvenience, but deep down, he feels an inexplicable dread creeping in. It's as if the town itself is holding him in place, and he has no idea how long he'll be trapped here. The next morning, Joe wakes to the faint sound of birds chirping outside his window. For a moment, he forgets where he is. But then reality hits, and the irritation from the previous day comes rushing back. He's still stuck in this town, and he still has a job waiting for him somewhere else. Joe grabs his phone, but there's no new message from the mechanic. After a quick shower, he decides to head out and grab breakfast at the cafe he saw yesterday. On his way out of the inn, he passes the innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile that seems genuine enough. "Good morning, Joe," she says, her tone almost too cheerful. "Sleep well?" "As well as you can in a strange bed," Joe replies with a polite smile. "I was hoping to hear back from the mechanic today. I need to get back on the road." The innkeeper's smile falters slightly. "Oh, things move a bit slower here. Not like the big cities." Her eyes linger on him for a moment longer than he's comfortable with, and he quickly excuses himself. At the cafe, he orders a simple breakfast and takes a seat by the window, hoping to get a better sense of the town's rhythm. As he sips his coffee, he notices a group of locals chatting near the entrance, occasionally glancing in his direction. Their conversation lowers to hushed tones when they catch him looking, and one of them, a tall man with a weathered face, gives him a nod of acknowledgement that feels more like a warning than a greeting. Joe shrugs it off, telling himself he's being paranoid. But as he finishes his meal, an older gentleman approaches his table, leaning heavily on a cane. The man looks him over with a curious expression, his eyes sharp and calculating. "New in town, are you?" the old man asks, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. "Just passing through," Joe replies, trying to sound casual. "Car troubles?" The old man nods knowingly. "Funny thing about cars in this town," he says, his tone laced with something Joe can't quite place. "Seems like they tend to break down more often than not." Joe raises an eyebrow. "Is that so?" The man just shrugs, offering no further explanation. Joe finishes his coffee and thanks the man, but the encounter leaves him unsettled. He steps outside, breathing in the crisp morning air, and decides to take a walk. Maybe some fresh air will clear his head and help him shake off this lingering feeling of unease. As he walks, he notices more oddities. A boarded-up shop with a faded for sale sign. A young girl watching him intently from a porch across the street, only to disappear as soon as he meets her gaze. And then there's the church, an imposing structure at the end of the main road, its steeple towering over the other buildings. There's something about it that feels wrong, though he can't quite put his finger on it. Lost in thought, Joe nearly collides with a woman carrying a basket of flowers. She smiles apologetically, and he recognizes her as the barista from the cafe. "Sorry about that," she says with a laugh. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind." "Just trying to figure this place out," Joe admits. "Feels like there's a story around every corner." The barista's smile fades slightly, and she glances over her shoulder before responding. "It's a nice town, but well, some folks here don't take too kindly to outsiders. Just keep to yourself, and you'll be fine." Before he can ask her to elaborate, she hurries off, leaving Joe standing alone in the street. He watches her disappear around a corner, the weight of her words settling over him. He can't shake the feeling that there's something people aren't telling him, something that might explain the strange looks, the cryptic comments, and the way the town seems to press in around him, as if it's alive and aware of his presence. Joe heads back to the mechanic's shop, hoping for some progress, but he finds the doors still locked and the garage eerily silent. He checks his watch, wondering if the man had any intention of showing up today. His patience is wearing thin, but he's starting to suspect that impatience won't get him anywhere in this town. As he walks back to the inn, Joe feels the weight of eyes on him. Every glance, every whisper, seems to feed his growing paranoia. This isn't just a quiet town, it's a place with secrets, and he's beginning to wonder if his car's breakdown was just an unfortunate coincidence or the first piece of a puzzle he didn't know he'd be solving. Back at the inn, Joe paces his room, frustration gnawing at him. He's tried calling the mechanic multiple times, but each call goes straight to voicemail. It feels like he's hit a dead end. He glances out the window, watching a few people stroll leisurely along the sidewalk, seemingly without a care in the world. The town's slow pace has shifted from charming to unnerving, and he's beginning to feel like he's trapped in a strange dream. Deciding he can't wait any longer, Joe heads out to track down the mechanic himself. If he has to walk across town to find the guy, so be it. But as he steps onto the street, he notices a figure approaching, a young man in a delivery uniform carrying a package. The man stops in front of him, extending the package with an apologetic look. "Delivery for you, sir," the young man says, handing Joe a small cardboard box. Joe takes it, frowning. "I didn't order anything." The delivery man shrugs. "Just following instructions. It was left at the post office with your name on it." Joe examines the box, searching for a return address, but there's nothing on it except a hastily scrawled Joe. He tears it open and finds a small envelope inside, along with a worn, old-fashioned key. He looks up, but the delivery man has already turned and is disappearing down the street. Curiosity gets the better of him, and Joe opens the envelope. Inside is a short note written in shaky handwriting. "Sometimes you have to look back to find the way forward." There's no signature, no explanation, just the cryptic message and the key. Joe's heart pounds as he pockets the key and the note, glancing around as if expecting someone to pop out and offer an explanation. But the street is empty, and the townspeople he sees in the distance seem oblivious. Unsure of what to do with the key, Joe decides to go back to the inn and take a closer look at the mysterious item. As he approaches the innkeeper steps out, a concerned expression on her face. "I was just about to come find you," she says. "The mechanic called. He says he's found the part you need, but there's been another delay." Joe's frustration bubbles over. "Another delay? You're kidding me." She shakes her head, looking genuinely sympathetic. "I know it's inconvenient, but it's the way things are around here. He said he'd try to have it fixed by tomorrow." Joe mutters a thank you and heads back to his room, the strange package still on his mind. He sits on the bed, turning the key over in his hand. It's old, made of brass, and looks like it belongs to a lock from decades ago. He can't imagine what it's for or why someone would go out of their way to leave it for him, but he senses it's significant. Trying to distract himself, Joe decides to explore the inn. He's curious if the key matches any of the old locks he noticed when he first checked in. Making his way down the hall, he spots a door near the back that looks different from the others, almost as if it's been deliberately left untouched for years. The paint is chipped, and the doorknob is tarnished, but it looks like it could fit the key he's holding. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Joe inserts the key into the lock. It turns with a soft click, and he steps inside, finding himself in a small, musty room filled with old furniture and boxes. Dust motes float in the air, and a faint, sweet smell lingers, like someone's perfume long faded. He rifles through the boxes, finding old photos, letters, and newspaper clippings. Most of it seems innocuous, until he comes across a small black and white photo of a man standing in front of the same inn, his face partially obscured by shadows. Joe's heart skips a beat. He could swear the man in the photo looks like the mechanic he met the day before, only younger. As he examines the photo, he notices a date scrawled on the back, March 1962. Joe frowns, trying to reconcile the idea that the man he met yesterday could be the same one in this decades-old photo. It seems impossible, but nothing in this town has made sense so far. Suddenly, he hears a creak behind him. Joe turns, but there's no one there? He quickly slips the photo into his pocket and exits the room, locking the door behind him. He has more questions now than ever, and with each strange encounter, the town feels more like a trap he's unwittingly stepped into. As Joe returns to his room, he feels the weight of the key still in his pocket. Whatever it opens, it seems to have unlocked something much larger, a puzzle he's only just begun to unravel. And with each piece he discovers, he feels a growing certainty that leaving this town won't be as simple as getting his car fixed. Joe wakes up the next morning with the photo from the inn still weighing on his mind. He flips it over in his hands, studying the man's shadowed face and the date on the back. He feels an odd sense of déjà vu, as if the person in the picture is someone he should remember. Maybe it's just the stress of the delays and the growing strangeness of the town, but he can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than coincidence. After breakfast, Joe decides to visit the local library, hoping to find some information about the town's past. The library is a quaint building, lined with shelves of worn books, and adorned with a few dusty artifacts in glass cases. He approaches the librarian, a wiry woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and asks if there are any old town records or newspapers he could look through. The librarian eyes him suspiciously. Looking for something specific? Just curious about the town's history, Joe replies casually. Thought it might help pass the time while I'm stuck here. She watches him for a moment before leading him to a back corner filled with stacks of yellowed newspapers and bound records. Help yourself, she says, a hint of a smile on her lips. But don't go digging too deep. Some things are better left in the past. Joe's curiosity flares as he pulls out a stack of newspapers from the early 1960s, hoping to find something that ties to the photo he found. As he flips through the pages, an article catches his eye. It's about a man named Tom, who owned a local auto shop. Joe's eyes widen when he sees the accompanying photo. It's the same man from the picture he found at the inn, and the article dates to March 1962. According to the article, Tom had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving the townsfolk puzzled and rumors swirling. There were whispers of a scandal, but no one knew for sure what had happened. The article quotes several townspeople describing him as a man with secrets, though they don't elaborate. Joe's mind races as he recalls his encounter with the mechanic. Could it be the same person? It seems impossible, but in this town, nothing feels quite real. As Joe continues reading, a familiar face appears at the edge of his vision. It's the barista from the cafe, carrying a stack of books. She catches his eye and gives him a slight nod, as if she's been waiting for him. He closes the newspaper and walks over to her. Funny seeing you here, she says, placing her books on a nearby table. You're not from around here, are you? No, Joe replies, studying her. Just passing through. Or at least, I was supposed to be. The barista lowers her voice, glancing around as if someone might be listening. You shouldn't go poking around too much. This town? It's not like other places. Joe leans in, his pulse quickening. What do you mean? Is there something I should know? She hesitates, biting her lip. People here don't like strangers getting too comfortable. You've probably noticed that things aren't quite normal. That's an understatement, Joe mutters. Who was Tom, really? The man in this old newspaper photo. She looks surprised but recovers quickly. Tom was the best mechanic this town ever had. But he had a reputation, a knack for getting involved in things that weren't his business. He knew things about people, things they didn't want anyone else to know. When he disappeared, folks said the town was better off. Joe presses her for more details, but she shakes her head, a shadow crossing her face. I've already said too much. Just be careful. Sometimes, it's easier to leave well enough alone. Before he can ask more, she slips away, leaving him alone with more questions than answers. Joe heads back to the inn, his mind racing. He can't shake the feeling that everyone in this town knows something they're not telling him, that they're all in on some secret he's not supposed to uncover. Later, as he's sitting in his room, there's a knock on the door. Joe opens it to find the mechanic standing there, his face hard and unreadable. Your car'll be ready tomorrow, the mechanic says, his voice low. But a word of advice, when you're back on the road, don't look back. Just keep driving. Joe's stomach tightens. What is it you're not telling me? The mechanic glances down the hallway, as if ensuring no one else is listening. This place has a way of keeping people who don't belong. You seem like a smart guy. Don't make the mistake others have. Without waiting for a response, the mechanic turns and walks away, leaving Joe standing in the doorway, a chill running down his spine. He closes the door and leans against it, his thoughts spiraling. He's never been one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions, but this town is starting to make him question everything he thought he knew. As he prepares for what he hopes will be his final night in town, Joe wonders if he'll ever truly be free of this place, or if he's already become part of the mystery that's held others here before him. following morning, Joe wakes to find an envelope slipped under his door. It's unmarked, with no clue as to who left it. He opens it cautiously, revealing a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message: "Meet me at the old barn, noon. Come alone." Joe's heart races as he reads and rereads the note. He doesn't know who left it, but he senses it might be his only chance to get answers. He pockets the note and makes his way downstairs, trying to act casual as he passes the innkeeper, who offers him her usual forced smile. He skips breakfast, eager to avoid another round of suspicious glances from the locals. He sets off in search of the barn, relying on directions from his phone. The outskirts of town are eerily quiet, the stillness punctuated only by the crunch of gravel beneath his feet. As he walks, he passes a few houses, each one appearing more desolate than the last. Joe can't shake the feeling that he's being watched, but each time he glances over his shoulder, he finds the street empty. The barn is easy to find, a decrepit structure on the edge of town, its faded red paint peeling in long strips. Joe hesitates at the entrance, peering into the shadows before stepping inside. The air is thick with the smell of old hay and damp wood, and the only light filters through gaps in the weathered walls. "Thought you'd be smarter than this," a voice calls from the shadows. Joe's head snaps around to see an older man emerge from the far corner of the barn. He's tall, with a lean frame and piercing blue eyes that seem to bore into Joe's soul. There's something about the man that feels familiar, though Joe can't place him. "You left the note?" Joe asks, his voice echoing off the empty walls. The man nods, his expression unreadable. "I figured you'd want to know what you're dealing with. You've seen enough to know that this isn't just some quiet town." Joe crosses his arms, trying to mask his nerves. "I've had my suspicions. But no one seems willing to tell me the truth. Why am I still here? Why can't I leave?" The man sighs, leaning against a wooden beam. "You're here because you stumbled into a place that doesn't let go. Some call it a curse, others say the town's a prison. Once you're in, leaving isn't as simple as walking away." Joe clenches his fists, frustration boiling over. "That's just a story. People don't get trapped in towns. There has to be an explanation." "There is," the man replies, his gaze unwavering. "This place feeds on secrets. The more you try to dig, the tighter its hold becomes. Those people you've met, they're not what they seem. They're as much a part of this town as the buildings and the streets. And the moment you started asking questions, you became part of it, too." Joe shakes his head, refusing to believe it. "I'm just passing through. I have a life outside of here. I have a job, people who know me." The man gives a bitter laugh. "That's what we all thought. You're not the first to try and escape, and you won't be the last to fail. This place, it has a way of making people forget. You might think you're here a day, a week. But it could be longer. Time slips away here, unnoticed." A chill runs down Joe's spine. He takes a step back, suddenly feeling like he's suffocating. "You're saying there's no way out?" The man's expression softens, a hint of pity in his eyes. "There's always a way. But it requires something few are willing to give up. I managed to slip away once, thought I'd escaped. But here I am. The town found me, brought me back. And now I'm warning you, if you don't stop asking questions, you'll lose yourself here." Joe's mind races as he tries to make sense of the man's words. "So, what's the answer? How do I escape?" The man pulls something from his pocket, a small, polished stone with strange symbols carved into it. "Take this. It won't get you out, but it'll protect you. Keep it close, and if you're lucky, you might find a way. But know this, the more you try to leave, the more it will resist. Joe takes the stone, its cool surface grounding him amid the whirlwind of thoughts. The man turns to leave, stopping at the barn's entrance to look back one last time. Whatever you do, don't trust anyone. Not the innkeeper, not the barista, and especially not the mechanic. They're not what they seem. Without another word, the man disappears into the sunlight, leaving Joe alone in the barn. He grips the stone tightly, feeling its weight in his hand as a fresh wave of dread settles over him. The man's warning echoes in his ears, each word etching itself into his mind. Joe knows now that he's in over his head. He's not just facing a town with peculiar residents, he's up against something much bigger, something beyond his understanding. As he pockets the stone and leaves the barn, he feels the weight of the town pressing down on him, more suffocating than ever. He doesn't know how, but he's determined to escape. Yet with each step, he wonders if the man was right, if by questioning and digging, he's only tightening the town's hold on. The following morning, Joe wakes to find an envelope slipped under his door. It's unmarked, with no clue as to who left it. He opens it cautiously, revealing a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message, "Meet me at the old barn, noon. Come alone." Joe's heart races as he reads and rereads the note. He doesn't know who left it, but he senses it might be his only chance to get answers. He pockets the note and makes his way downstairs, trying to act casual as he passes the innkeeper, who offers him her usual forced smile. He skips breakfast, eager to avoid another round of suspicious glances from the locals. He sets off in search of the barn, relying on directions from his phone. The outskirts of town are eerily quiet, the stillness punctuated only by the crunch of gravel beneath his feet. As he walks, he passes a few houses, each one appearing more desolate than the last. Joe can't shake the feeling that he's being watched, but each time he glances over his shoulder, he finds the street empty. The barn is easy to find, a decrepit structure on the edge of town, its faded red paint peeling in long strips. Joe hesitates at the entrance, peering into the shadows before stepping inside. The air is thick with the smell of old hay and damp wood, and the only light filters through gaps in the weathered walls. "Thought you'd be smarter than this," a voice calls from the shadows. Joe's head snaps around to see an older man emerge from the far corner of the barn. He's tall, with a lean frame and piercing blue eyes that seem to bore into Joe's soul. There's something about the man that feels familiar, though Joe can't place him. "You left the note?" Joe asks, his voice echoing off the empty walls. The man nods, his expression unreadable. "I figured you'd want to know what you're dealing with. You've seen enough to know that this isn't just some quiet town." Joe crosses his arms, trying to mask his nerves. "I've had my suspicions. But no one seems willing to tell me the truth. Why am I still here? Why can't I leave?" The man sighs, leaning against a wooden beam. "You're here because you stumbled into a place that doesn't let go. Some call it a curse, others say the town's a prison. Once you're in, leaving isn't as simple as walking away." Joe clenches his fists, frustration boiling over. "That's just a story. People don't get trapped in towns. There has to be an explanation." "There is," the man replies, his gaze unwavering. "This place feeds on secrets. The more you try to dig, the tighter its hold becomes. Those people you've met, they're not what they seem. They're as much a part of this town as the buildings and the streets. And the moment you started asking questions, you became part of it, too." Joe shakes his head, refusing to believe it. "I'm just passing through. I have a life outside of here. I have a job, people who know me. The man gives a bitter laugh. That's what we all thought. You're not the first to try and escape, and you won't be the last to fail. This place, it has a way of making people forget. You might think you're here a day, a week. But it could be longer. Time slips away here, unnoticed. A chill runs down Joe's spine. He takes a step back, suddenly feeling like he's suffocating. You're saying there's no way out? The man's expression softens, a hint of pity in his eyes. There's always a way. But it requires something few are willing to give up. I managed to slip away once, thought I'd escaped. But here I am. The town found me, brought me back. And now I'm warning you, if you don't stop asking questions, you'll lose yourself here. Joe's mind races as he tries to make sense of the man's words. So, what's the answer? How do I escape? The man pulls something from his pocket, a small, polished stone with strange symbols carved into it. Take this. It won't get you out, but it'll protect you. Keep it close, and if you're lucky, you might find a way. But know this, the more you try to leave, the more it will resist. Joe takes the stone, its cool surface grounding him amid the whirlwind of thoughts. The man turns to leave, stopping at the barn's entrance to look back one last time. Whatever you do, don't trust anyone. Not the innkeeper, not the barista, and especially not the mechanic. They're not what they seem. Without another word, the man disappears into the sunlight, leaving Joe alone in the barn. He grips the stone tightly, feeling its weight in his hand as a fresh wave of dread settles over him. The man's warning echoes in his ears, each word etching itself into his mind. Joe knows now that he's in over his head. He's not just facing a town with peculiar residents, he's up against something much bigger, something beyond his understanding. As he pockets the stone and leaves the barn, he feels the weight of the town pressing down on him, more suffocating than ever. He doesn't know how, but he's determined to escape. Yet with each step, he wonders if the man was right, if by questioning and digging, he's only tightening the town's hold on. As dusk settles over the town, Joe returns to his room at the inn, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He now knows the town's secret, that it's a trap, designed to ensnare and consume those who wander into its grip. The mechanic's words still echo in his mind, a reminder that escaping won't be easy. Joe pulls out the old stone, examining the symbols etched into its surface. He feels an inexplicable connection to it, as if it holds the key to his survival. But as he traces the carvings with his finger, he recalls what he read in the library about the stones, their protective charms, meant to ward off the town's hold. Suddenly, the room's lights flicker, and a distant rumble of thunder signals an approaching storm. Joe crosses to the window and peers out, his heart sinking as he sees the streets beginning to flood. The rain comes down in torrents, trapping him even further. The storm is fierce, a brutal reminder that he's truly at the mercy of the town now. Determined not to waste any more time, Joe grabs his bag and sets out into the storm. He has only one destination in mind, the edge of town. He's going to make a break for it, rain or not. But as he reaches the end of Main Street, he sees a group of townspeople gathered, their faces hidden beneath umbrellas and rain-soaked hoods. They stand silently, blocking his path. Going somewhere. It's the innkeeper, her face drawn and expressionless. Joe feels a surge of desperation. I have to leave. I can't stay here. She steps forward, her eyes filled with a cold, unsettling resolve. The town decides who stays and who goes. You've seen too much, asked too many questions. Joe takes a step back, clutching the stone in his pocket. The townspeople move closer, forming a circle around him. He realizes, in that moment, that they're all complicit in this, the sacrifices, the disappearances. They're willing participants in the town's twisted game, and now he's the next piece on the board. But Joe isn't willing to give up. He raises the stone in front of him, and to his surprise, the townspeople shrink back, as if repelled by its presence. He uses the opportunity to break through their circle and runs toward the only road out of town, his heart pounding as he feels the rain lash against his face. He doesn't stop running until he reaches the edge of town, where he finds his car, waiting exactly as he left it. He fumbles for his keys, hoping against hope that the car will start. As he turns the ignition, the engine roars to life, and for the first time, he feels a glimmer of hope. Without a backward glance, Joe drives away, the headlights cutting through the storm as he speeds down the empty road. But even as he escapes the town's grasp, a lingering unease settles over him. He knows he's not truly free, not yet. Joe drives through the night, not stopping until he reaches the outskirts of a neighboring town. Exhausted but relieved, he pulls into a gas station, desperate to refuel and catch his breath. As he fills the tank, he glances around, the reality of his escape finally settling in. He made it. He's free. But as he steps inside to pay, he catches sight of his reflection in the glass door. Something's different. His face seems older, more lined, as if he's aged years in the span of a single night. He rubs his eyes, chalking it up to stress, and pays the attendant, eager to leave the memory of that town behind. When he gets back in his car, he reaches into his pocket, expecting to feel the stone. But it's gone. In its place, he finds a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. He unfolds it, his heart racing as he reads the words, scrawled across the page, "You are free, but freedom has a price." Confused and unnerved, Joe tosses the paper aside and continues driving, hoping to put as much distance as possible between himself and the nightmare he's escaped. But as he drives, he notices strange things. The road signs are unfamiliar, the landscape too barren. It's as if he's driving through a place that doesn't exist on any map. Finally, he stops at a small diner, hoping for directions. Inside, the patrons give him strange looks, their faces pale and drawn. He sits at the counter, ordering coffee, when the waitress, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, approaches him. "You've been to that town, haven't you?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe's heart skips a beat. "How did you know?" She gives him a sad smile. "You carry its mark. Once you've been there, it never really lets you go." He stares at her, trying to make sense of her words. "I left. I made it out." She shakes her head, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You may have left, but part of you is still there. And part of it is with you. It's how the town survives." Joe leaves the diner, his mind spinning. He drives through the night, trying to make sense of what he's just heard. He checks his phone, desperate for any sign of normalcy, but it's dead, no service, no GPS. He feels as though he's caught in a loop, as if every mile he drives only brings him closer to something he can't escape. And then, as dawn breaks, Joe finds himself at a crossroads. The same crossroads he passed when he first entered the town. He slams on the brakes, staring in disbelief. It's as if he's never left. The road stretches out before him, the same way it did days ago, and the town waits, silent and watchful, just beyond the trees. Joe realizes then that the town was never a place, it's a force, a curse that binds itself to those who seek to escape it. He's not the first to try, and he won't be the last. With a sinking heart, he turns his car around and heads back into town, knowing that he's part of it now. He belongs to the town as much as it belongs to him. As he drives down the familiar streets, he feels the townspeople's eyes on him, their expressions a mix of pity and relief. They know he's back, just as they always knew he would be. Joe parks outside the inn, stepping out of the car as the innkeeper greets him with that same forced smile. "Welcome back," she says, as if he's been gone only a moment. Joe nods, understanding now that he's never truly left, that he never will. He feels the town's hold tighten around him, an invisible tether that binds him to its secrets, its darkness, its endless cycle. He steps inside, the door closing behind him with a final, resolute thud. And in that moment, Joe knows that he's become part of the town's story, a story that will continue long after he's gone, trapping others as it trapped him, an endless loop from which there is no escape.